Hello, everyone. So this is our first open mic. I will see many of you in just a little bit at the graduate reception. But just to show you that these can be very informal, I am still at my house and I have not gotten professionally dressed yet today. So again, these can be quite informal. My dog is here. Working hard, helping me to work hard. So today we are talking about Mary Seacole's text. And while most of our open mics will just be the first week of the novel, so it will probably pertain to sort of the first half, we're only spending 1 week on Seacole. So the expectation is that you would have read all of Seacole, which will be good for this particular prompt because we're going to sort of think about this idea of space, and this will open up all the spaces for you that she travels to. So on the Canvas website, when you go to post your open mic, you'll see I've posted a little description of life writing and the novel. And so that is the genre that we would consider Seacole's text to be, as a form of life writing. You could also call it autobiography. There is a reason for the distinction between those terms, but we don't need to worry about that for our purposes. We might also think about this in relation to Martineau's text, right? And is this also a form of life writing that she has? Mary Seacole does identify herself on the title page of her text. So unlike Martineau, who tries to withhold her identity a little bit, Mary Seacole is very forthcoming about hers. And it is this idea of identity that I want us to think about in relation to space with this prompt. So what's interesting about this short little piece from the Oxford Bibliographies, and I've linked it there if you want to go see it, but it's also pasted on Canvas. If you scroll down, it talks about different components of life writing. It talks about memory, experience, identity, embodiment, and then space is one of the categories that it includes. And it describes space not just as a geographical site, and this part might drive Sarah crazy because it then just opens it up to basically become everything, right? So it describes space also as, and here I'm just reading from the page, national, ethnic, racial, gendered, sexual, social, and life cycle coordinates in which narrators are embedded by virtue of their experiential histories from which they speak. So if we sort of think similarly to Bakhtin's chronotope, which is sort of like the moment where time and space connect, the way that they're describing space here to me is similar. So you're in a particular space, but how is it coordinated with the ethnic or racial identity or gender identity of that person, of their social situation, their class, etc., age, all those kinds of considerations. So that's what I want us to think about in terms of Mary Seacole's text. There's lots of work out there. I shouldn't say lots, but there's some work out there where scholars are trying to figure out what is motivating Mary Seacole to write this text in the way that she presents herself. So her self-representation is what people get really interested in. And so I want to think about how space influences her representation of herself. Whether we want to argue that she is aware of that construction or not, we can sort of set that question aside for a minute, but just how the particular spaces that she is in seem to affect her identity. Now, by identity here, we could talk about her racial identity. We could talk about her role as a mother. She sometimes sort of adopts that role towards the soldiers. Her role as a nurse, which earlier in earlier in the memoir, we can see how she carefully cultivates her credentials as a nurse, and then obviously continues that nursing activity. She's a business owner, all kinds of different identities. She's a woman, right? So I want you to sort of think of picking an identity, right? And then picking a particular space. So there are also lots of different spaces that she inhabits. 2 different hotels, like one in Crimea, one in Crucius, her store in Navy Bay. She spent some time in London. She's on the battlefield, of course, in Crimea. She's in Jamaica. She's in Panama. She spends time aboard ships. So, big spaces, little spaces, you can get kind of as abstract or specific as you want. But I just want you to explore for a moment how that particular space influences her identity. Just as an example of 2 spaces, sorry, I just lost there it is. One space that we might think about, I've always been really interested in the section where she makes a plea she wants to do it directly to Florence Nightingale, but Florence Nightingale has already left for the Crimea, so she ends up just talking to one of her head nurses, and Seacole wants to join them as one of Nightingale's nurses, and she gets denied, which, reading between the lines, Seacole's not very direct about this, but it seems to be on the basis of race. But and this is in chapter Roman numerals 8 of the second part, and she is sitting in the hall of this giant house that serves as I just lost my place. Some war official's house. The secretary at war. Apparently he's running his sort of offices out of this big house. And so she describes sitting in that hall and just being passed by people and then looking at her, and clearly she feels like she doesn't belong, and then is ultimately rejected. So that to me is an interesting moment again of like, what does it mean for her sense of self to be in that space and the feelings that brought up? Another sort of maybe less serious space is early in the text when she goes to sleep and realizes she doesn't have a place to sleep. This is when she's helping her brother out at his hotel type place, and she ends up sleeping under a table but tries to turn it into like a private space by putting curtains around it. So again, just another really interesting moment of the space that she tries to transform into an appropriate bedroom, kind of based on her identity as a woman. What does it mean for her to be in this really public space, and how is she negotiating that? And just the fact that she talks about some of these things, which would not be appropriate spaces for a woman to be in, and why does she even mention that, and how is that part of, the identity she's curating? So I realize this went really long. This will be the danger when you're doing yours. So just kind of keep in mind, you want this to be 3 to 4 minutes. Maybe you could push 5 minutes. So just kind of think through your answer a little bit, but you're just getting in quick, right? It doesn't have to be a lot. So just, what is the space? What's the identity? Give us an example from the book. And then we will take that up further in class discussion. So if you have more to say or more you want us to think about, we can carry it over into class.